So we're about to start our I think this is lecture number 8 of the Moreh Nevuchim, and today is a very special day because we have a chance to begin the actual text of the Moreh Nevuchim itself, as opposed to all of the various introductions and instructions and lead-ups. And so it's part 1, chapter 1 is what we're going to begin with today. Before we start before the Rambam, in his usual way, before he begins a book or a chapter, he always quotes, gives a biblical quote, which is a lead-in and to what everything he's about to say. And this biblical quote he chooses to lead into the entire sefer of Moreh Nevuchim. So it's a very special one. And just like when he had these quotes prior to the introduction, I expounded a little bit on suggesting possible reasons why he chose that quote. I'm going to do the same thing today, and so I'll be a little bit of a sermon here. So forgive me for that, but I think it's really important, and it will help us really get a feel for what the Rambam is about to do in this book. He chooses one of my favorite verses, and the verse in the Hebrew, it's from Isaiah. 26 verse 2, and this verse reads as follows: Pitchu she'arim, and I'm going to translate in a moment. V'yavo goy tzadik shomer emunim. One of the reasons why this verse is special to me is because in the shul that I grew up in, or not so much grew up in, but I spent my many years of my youth in Baltimore, where the shul where my father was the rav, over the Aron Kodesh, this verse was written. The name of the shul was Shomrei Emuna, so this verse was very appropriate. Pitchu she'arim, literally it means as follows: open the gates, v'yavo goy tzadik, and may a righteous nation enter. Shomer Emunim, the nation that keeps its faith, or keeps the truth, depending on exactly how you translate Emunim. Now, if one were to look at, the Rambam chooses this as the verse to lead off his book, and I'm going to suggest a reason why. But beforehand, let's understand this verse. This is in one of the parts of Isaiah where he is describing the idyllic future, and the verse that preceded that, this one, talks about Bayom Mahu, on that day, Yushar Hashir Hazeh, this new song, this beautiful song will be sung in Eretz Yehuda, in the land of Judea. Ir Oz Lanu, this city, the city of Jerusalem, is a strong city for us. Yeshua Yashit, it will this city brings salvation, or brings victory to Chomot Vachel, and that becomes victory, becomes our wall and our strength and our extra wall. And then he says, Pitchu she'arim, open the gates, v'yavo goy tzadik, and may a righteous nation enter. Shomer emunim, one that keeps the faith. Now, if you look at the classic traditional commentaries, or the medieval commentaries, if you could pick up a traditional Jewish Makrot Gedolot, you'll find the commentaries, all of whom are medieval, virtually all of whom were after Maimonides' day, and they pretty much explained this verse in some form of the following way: open the gates of Jerusalem. This is talking about the days of the Messiah. Open the gates of Jerusalem, and may the righteous nation, meaning the nation of Israel, enter. The nation that was Shomer Emunim, that kept the faith throughout all of the dark years of suffering. This nation kept the faith. Open the gates of Jerusalem and welcome that nation in. Now, when I read Isaiah myself, and again, this is a plug for my own podcast, it occurred to me that this doesn't seem to me to be the proper translation of the pasuk. And that's all my years growing up in shul. That's what I assumed it meant when I saw it in front of me when I was davening, because it was up there in the front wall, all nice and engraved. I thought to open the gates of heaven and allow the faithful people, the Jewish people, to come into the gates of heaven, so to speak. But actually, what it occurred to me that what Yeshayahu, and I'm going to say right now, what he really meant was pretty much the opposite of that. And what do I mean? What he really meant was to say that we, the people of Judea, just like he said in the prior verse, we are here. Our strength is not in walls, but our strength is the city of Jerusalem. So open the gates of Jerusalem so that any nation that is righteous and trustworthy and keeps trust can enter and come and join. And when you look at the context, this makes much more sense in the context of Yeshayahu, and it fits much more into all of Isaiah's visions of what the future means, the future where the entire world comes to Jerusalem. V'noharu elov kol hagoyim. Now, this is what I thought, and this is what I knew, but when you look at the classic commentaries, that's not how they explain it. But but if you look though at the Sifra, which is the earlier give me 1 second. If you look at actually how the rabbis from Talmudic times, how they explained the verse, then you'll see something very different from that explanation, and you'll see that my initial understanding of Yeshayahu was correct, and it was exactly what Yeshaya had in mind according to the rabbinic understanding, and that will lead us to understand why Maimonides specifically chose this verse to head off the book. And I'm going to read to you from the Sifra, which is one of the earliest forms of midrash on the verse, and it reads as follows: Hayya Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer. Rabbi Yirmiyah used to say, "Minayan ata Omer." How do I know that one can say that afilu nachri, that even one who is a Gentile, Torah, and he lives his life according to the rules, dictates, and morals of the Torah, that harehu kikohen gadol, that he has the same status as the high priest himself. Talmud Lomar, the Torah teaches us, asher yaseh osam ha'adam v'chai bohem, that these rules of the Torah are those which will be done by a human being, and he shall live by that. V'chein hu omer, and similarly it says, v'zos torat ha'adam, and this is the Torah of humans, of people. Torah takohanim v'leviim v'Yisrael lo nemar. It does not say this is the Torah of the priests, Levites, and Israelites, but rather el Torah to Adam. And then another proof text Rabbi Yirmiyah brings, v'chein hu omer, and similarly it says, pitchu sha'arim, open the gates, v'yavo goy tzadik, and may a righteous nation enter, shomer omenim, one who keeps the truth, one who is trustworthy and faithful. V'yavo kohanim leviim v'Yisrael lo nemar. It doesn't say open the gates and the priests or the Levites or the Israelites shall enter. Ela v'yavo goy tzadik, but rather it says, may it enter the goy tzadik, any nation that is righteous. Shomer amunim. And then it brings a few more proof texts, and then in the end it says, from here we see that afilu nachri, even a Gentile, v'oses haTorah, that keeps the Torah, harehu kikohen gadol. So now the actual rabbinic understanding of the verse of Isaiah was exactly what I thought it was. But now it really makes sense to understand Maimonides. Because as we go through this book of Maimonides, there's a few things that will be glaring that will come out of the text. And one of the most important ideas is his very universalistic, as opposed to particularistic understanding of Judaism. And that is this, any human being whose goal and objective is to seek the truth has the same access to the truth. That it doesn't matter if you're born a Jew or born, pick your nationality. Any human being that spends his or her life searching for the truth because it's the truth, and lives a life of proper morals and ethics, that person has access to the higher intellect, and which is the intellect of the godly intellect. And therefore, it's really, really a beautiful thing that Rambam chose this verse to lead off the book, and it really sets the tone for everything we're about to study together. Pitchu sha'arim, the Rambam says, open the gates. V'yavo goy tzadik. There's two things you need to do to come into these gates. I'm opening these gates of wisdom to you, and number one, be righteous, live a righteous life, and number two, shomer emunim. You have to be steadfast to the truth. You have to be steadfast and trustworthy. Now we can begin. If you look, you can follow along in the Friedlander. I am going to start in, I'm going to be using the Pines. It's chapter 1. It's on Pines. It's page 21, chapter 1, part 1, chapter 1. So this part of the Rambam is he analyzes language and words, and it's very easy to get lost in thinking about this as a technical analysis of language. However, if you look at it that way, it can be very dry, it can be very boring, and you really miss the point. The point, and I'm going to focus on, I'm going farther than just the meaning of the words, and delve into how the Rambam really used his analysis of the word to understand the verses. And we're going to have so many chances to go back and look at verses, see the way Rambam read them, and find many beautiful ideas. So it starts off with this. The two words that Rambam is going to start off at analyzing are the words Tzelem and Demut. Tzelem is the Hebrew word usually translated as some sort of image, and Demut is some sort of likeness. The languages of Tzelem and Demut. Now, the reason why Rambam chooses this language is because those of us that are familiar with Genesis, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, I'm just going to read the two verses, 26 and 27. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kitmutenu, let us create man in our tzelem, and according to our demut, which could be translated as in our likeness and in our image. V'yirdu b'degat hayam, and he shall rule over, and exactly how to translate yirdu or rule over is a subject of a different discussion, over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heaven and so on. And the next verse, Vayivra Elohim et hadam b'tzalmo, God created the human being in his tzelem, in his image, b'tzelem Elohim bara'o, so with the image of God, bara'o, so he created him, zachar u'nekeva, male and female, bara'o, some he created them. So this verse is is a very difficult verse to translate and deal with, and Rambam is about to deal with it, and let's see what he says. People have thought, now I'm reading in the Pines, and I'm going to, as my usual path, I'm going to stop here and there and comment. So people have thought that in the Hebrew language, the word image, tzelem, denotes the shape and configuration of a thing. So a tzelem being a form, you imagine the shape. It has arms, legs, head, stomach, and so on and so forth. This supposition led them to the pure doctrine of the corporeality of God. So they assumed right away when we read this verse that on account of his saying, let us make man in our image after our likeness, bitzalmenu kidmusenu, right? For they thought that God has a man's form. I mean, his shape and configuration, that God has the same shape. He has a head, he has arms, he has legs, and so on, just like a human being. The pure doctrine of the corporality of God was a necessary consequence to be accepted by them. The people that read it this way, they accordingly believed in it and deemed that if they abandoned this belief, that if you would say anything else, they would give the lie to the biblical text. Then, if you don't believe it, then you're not trusting the words of the text. You're not being true to the text. That they would even make the deity to be nothing at all, unless they would, according to the text, one might even think that God is really nothing more than just a human being, unless they thought that, in other words, if you deny that, you're denying God completely. So it must be God as a body provided with a face and a hand, like them, just like they are as human beings in shape and configuration. However, he is in their view bigger and more resplendent than they themselves. And the matter of which he is composed is not flesh and blood, some other matter. It's not flesh and blood like we are, but he's some other thing. But it basically looks like a man, just much bigger, much stronger, much more powerful, and all kinds of superpowers. So as they see it, this is as far as one can go in establishing the separateness of God from other things. When one says that God is different than human beings, he's different because he's bigger, he's better, he's more powerful, he's smarter, he knows more, all kinds of things like that. Now, so let's think for a moment about what the Rambam just said. There's really, I divide into two groups of people that the Rambam is really addressing. There are and it's nowadays it would translate into an atheist, right? An atheist would look at the Bible and say that the Bible is creating an anthropomorphic God. They would understand it exactly as it says. It wouldn't bother them because they don't believe in God anyway, right? And so they would just say, you see, this is what the Old Testament says God is, and this is how they believe God is to be. Or you can look at it from on the other end of the spectrum as a biblical literalist. I'm reading this verse, this is what the verse says, and this is what God is. Neither of those approaches are good for the perplexed person of Maimonides, the one who he's writing this book for, the one who believes in God, right? On the one hand, is a religious man, but also believes in what he knows to be true based on science, philosophy, and logic. So we're perplexed, right? How do we deal with this problem? So the Rambam is going to just devote a few lines to stating, I'm not going to bother proving to you now that God is not corporeal, right? We'll deal with that later. Why it's so important that God doesn't have the form of a human body is something I'll deal with later. Now, I'll read his words. With respect to that which ought to be said in order to refute the doctrine of corporeality of God. In other words, to prove to you that God is not, maybe it's true, maybe it's no. I'll prove that to you, and to establish his real unity, which can have no true reality unless one disproves his corporeality. Right? You shall know the demonstration of all this from this treatise. That I'll say later on in this book. We'll get to that. Why corporeality is such a bad idea. However, here now in this chapter, only an indication is given. I'm just telling you, God is not corporeal. Take that for granted, right? Because I want to explain to you here how you look at the word of Demut and Tzelem, of image and likeness. So how is the Rambam going to deal with this? This is so let's take a look at how he deals with this. So first, he employs the strategy of, if I wanted to state that God, let's say it was true that there was a corporeal God. In other words, the Torah really wanted to teach us that God's form is the form of a human being. The Rambam says there are better Hebrew words that would absolutely describe it that way. And that word is toar. Now, I say that in the Hebrew language, the proper term designating the form that is well known among the multitude, anyone that knows Hebrew knows that if you want to actually describe the actual shape and like image of something, it's toar, right? Is the word toar. Thus, Scripture says, and I'll read from the Hebrew, so I have the verses in front of me. A second. Yefei toar v'yefei mara. We describe something and something is beautiful in form. Ma ta'aro. What is its form? Kitoar bnei hamelech. He has the look or the appearance of a prince. V'amar betzuro and so on. So these are some examples the Rambam uses. He marks its form yita'arehu. He draws out the form with the line. He marks its form yita'arehu. With the compass, so it's specifically describing a form of a shape. It's the word toar. However, in contrast, so that's the first, but that's a light proof. In other words, if the Torah wanted to say that God had an image of a man, it would have described his toar, not his tzelem. But the term tzelem, the term image, on the other hand, is applied to, and I'm going to explain this outside for a second before I read his words. That is that the word tzelem refers to the essence that makes a thing special, that makes it, right? What makes a human being a human being? And in Maimonidean philosophy, I'm going to tell you what he's going to say. That which makes a human being special as a human being is his intellect. That's what makes him unique. We're not different from animals in our tzelem. There's other animals many animals virtually have almost the same form. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a mouth, a nose, etc., and eyes. But what makes human a human is the special intellect that he has. So that is what tzelem is, right? Tzelem refers to what makes a person a person. Now, sometimes what makes something a thing is its actual form, right? What makes a chair is its shape, right? It's not the fact that it has wood or metal or whatever, right? It's the fact that it has a certain shape that allows you to sit on it, right? If you took that same material and you made a different shape, it would be a table or whatever, right? But for what makes a human being, it's not his shape, but it is his intellect. So therefore, and so I'm going to read from the Rambam's words now. The term image, on the other hand, the term Tzelem is applied to the natural form. I mean to the notion in virtue of which a thing is constituted as a substance and becomes what it is. It is the true reality of the thing insofar as the latter is that particular being. In man, that notion is that from which human apprehension derives. Well, a human's ability to understand things. It is on account of this intellectual apprehension that it is said of man, in the image of God created he him. For this reason also it is said, thou, okay, and this I'm going to bring he brings a verse from Tehillim from Psalms, which is interesting. It says Psalms 23. And in this chapter of Psalms, the writer, the one saying the Psalm, is saying how most of his life, he looked at the people who were evil and prospering, and they were enjoying their wonderful life. And he who is trying to live a righteous life is suffering, the old question of theodicy. But then I realized, one day I realized that their end is going to be, that all of this fun that they're having now, one day is going to be over, right? In other words, their objective, the ultimate aim and goal of their life is going to be ruined. So, and at the end of that, it says the verse that God himself, God, when God is awakened, he despises their image. He despises their Tzelem. So the Rambam proves from here, what does it mean he despises their Tzelem? It doesn't mean he despises their human form. Their human form is no different than anything else. He despises what makes them them, what makes them the cynical, arrogant people that were just being described. It's that quality that God hates, right? It's that quality that God despises. It's the quality of cynicism, the quality of arrogance, the quality of selfish pursuits, and so on. So lest you think, the Rambam says, that my explanation of the word Tzelem is just my own imagination, and I'm just trying to use it to get away with it. No, you see clearly that the word Tzelem is not referring to the form, but it's referring to the essence, the thing that makes a person a person. For contempt, the Rambam says, has for its object the soul, which is the specific form, not the shape and configuration of the parts of the body. And now the Rambam goes on to something else here, which is very interesting. There's another verse where the word Tzelem is used, and here's a place where you can just see how applying Rambam's method, you end up with a completely different, and in many cases deeper and much more meaningful understanding of the verse than would be otherwise. And this is going in the story of in Shmuel Aleph, in the book of Samuel 1. And this was at the time in history when the Philistines had captured in battle the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Kodesh. And the Aron Kodesh, as it was being held in captivity, was causing the people holding it all kinds of suffering. It eventually landed in the Philistine camp, and they were suffering with Tchorim, which is generally translated as hemorrhoids, that everyone was suffering from terrible hemorrhoids. Now, and they were also suffering from a plague of mice that were attacking the fields and eating the crops. And they attributed it to the fact that they were holding the Aron Kodesh hostage, and they wanted to give it back. So the people went to their leaders, their seers, their spiritual head leaders, they said, how can we get rid of all this suffering? We must need to give the ark back. And they tell them, give them the following instructions: make, and I'm going to translate literally and translate the way most translations understand this verse. This is 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 5. you should make Tzelem, forms of tzichorechem, literally of your hemorrhoids, v'Tzelem, and forms achberechem of your mice, hamashchitim es haaretz, which are destroying the land, and then presumably make them like out of gold or something, out of something precious. Unitzatem lelohei Yisrael kavod, and give those as gifts to the God of Israel. Ulai yokelet yadome alechem, maybe he will lighten up his punishments from upon you, ume'al Elohechem, and the punishments that he's meting out against your God, your religion, ume'al artzechem, and against your land. So the simple understanding of this verse is they were instructed to make forms of their their hemorrhoids and forms of mice and give them as gifts to the God's temple, to the temple of Israel. You know, the Rambam says, and I'm going to read a couple sentences, and you're going to see how he understands this completely differently. The word Tzelem here, the Rambam says, can't possibly mean make forms of the hemorrhoids, which it's hard to say. It's something that will make you laugh, right? But it just sounds silly. I assert, the Rambam says, that the reason why idols in general, often we find the word Tzelem referring to an idol, right? We find that throughout the Torah. But it's not because the idol is a form, but rather it lies in the fact that was sought in them was the notion that was deemed to subsist in them. In other words, when they looked at the idol, they thought that this idol stood for something, that there was some essence behind it, which is why they called them a Tzelem. You can have a form in your house that has no meaning, that's not a God. You can have a form in the temple that has meaning and is a God. So the form in the temple, they called it Tzelem. I assert similarly with regard to the scriptural expression, images of your hemorrhoids, right? For what was it? So what does this mean? When the Rambam says, and I'm going to read to you the verse now, according to the way Rambam reads this verse, they were instructed and told by their spiritual leaders, "Va'asitem tzalmei tzichorechem." Doesn't mean make forms of your hemorrhoids. It means you should make and think, in other words, think about the essence of why you're suffering. And think about the essence of why the mice are attacking your field. In other words, look into your behavior, look into what it is, why it is that you're suffering, and why it is that you're, and then unitatem lelohei Yisrael kavod. Then you can give honor to the God of Israel. How much more stunningly beautiful is that pasuk when you read it the way Rambam reads it, than when you read it as if they were told to make golden forms and donate them to the temple. It's astounding how much more beautiful it becomes, something which seemed like a very odd verse to begin with. All of a sudden is they're being encouraged to have a spiritual awakening. For what was intended by them was the notion of warding off the harm caused by the hemorrhoids and not the shape of the hemorrhoids. They weren't making shapes, right? The idea is what's the cause? What's the idea? What's the reason? Then but then the Rambam goes ahead and says, well, but let's say you don't like my explanation of the verse. And you say, no, it says va'asitem, you should make the shapes, the forms, and it really means the form. Well, I could still answer that, because if, however, there should be no doubt concerning the expressions of the images and images being used in order to denote shape and configuration, like let's say you decided that in that particular verse, it actually means the shape and configuration, then it would follow, I would explain it. If you remember Rambam, the first thing he said, right, in the beginning of the introduction was there's different words can often have several meanings. You can have, and he talked about equivocal terms, derivative terms, and amphibolious terms. All right, equivocal and amphibolious terms were words that had many meanings, or words that it's unclear what their meaning is and can mean different things depending on the context. So it would then follow that the word image is an equivocal or an amphibolious term applied to the specific form and also to the artificial form and to what is analogous to the two in shapes and configurations of the natural bodies. So in other words, so I can still say what I'm telling you, because I showed you that other places the word Tzelem means the essence and not the actual physical shape. That which was meant in the scriptural dictum in the word, let us make man in our image, na'aseh adam b'tzalmenu, was the specific form, was the meaning of the term in its specific meaning, which is, like Rambam said, its essence, which is intellectual apprehension, not the shape and configuration. So we've now explained to you the difference between image and form. and have explained the meaning of the word image. In other words, the difference between the word Tzelem and the word Toar. Toar meaning the physical form of things, Tzelem meaning the essence, that which makes something special, that which makes it. Now, the second term, as for the term likeness, it is a noun derived from the verb dome, to be like, right? So it said, let's make it in our image and in our likeness. There, the Rambam says, I really have a lot to stand on, because when I say our likeness, what does it mean when you say dome, something is compared to, is like something else, right? It too signifies likeness in respect of a notion. A human being is like the angels, is like God in a certain sense, in a certain way. For the scriptural dictum, I am, and he's going to bring different examples. I am like a pelican in the wilderness. Does not signify that its author resembled the pelican. And no one thinks that it means that I am like that bird, right? In other words, that I have wings and fly like the pelican. Of course not. With regard to its wings and feathers, but he means that I am sad like the sadness of the bird. In the same way, it says, nor was any tree in the garden of God like it unto it in beauty. No tree was dome, was like it, like that one. Or the likeness in respect to the notion of beauty. It's trying to say that this tree is nothing was similar to it. Nothing could be compared in the sense that nothing was as beautiful. Or their venom is the likeness of the venom. So his likeness is that of a lion and eager to tear it to pieces, so on and so forth. He brings all these examples. So they refer to both of them to a likeness in respect of a notion, not with respect to a shape and a configuration. In the same way, it is said the likeness of a throne, right? The likeness being referred to its elevation, its sublimity, its special grandeur, not in respect to the throne's square shape, how solid it is, how long its legs are, as some stupid people think, as wretched people think in Pine's words, right? So a similar explanation could be applied to the expression, the likeness of the living creatures. So after the Rambam just showered us with proof after proof after proof that kidmutenu, likeness does not mean the shape. Now he can come and explain to us what it means. Now, man possesses as his propria. What does a man have that makes him man, that makes him special? Something in him that is very strange, as it is not found in anything else that exists under the sphere of the moon. Nothing on this level of existence on this planet resembles a human being. Now, nowadays we might see more and more little bits of self-awareness in certain animals, but in the Rambam's mind, and even today, there's something that makes a human being, in terms of the intellect, a step above. And what is that? That is intellectual apprehension. And the exercise of this, no sense, no part of the body, none of the extremities are used. We might, with modern science, say this is different than other, because now when we can actually measure the thoughts as they bounce around through the neurons in our brain. So there actually are physical manifestations of our thoughts. But in the Rambam's day, in his science, he understood it being as pure, the intellect as being purely of the soul. So when a person's mind is thinking, that mind is purely devoid of a physical component. And therefore, this apprehension was likened unto the apprehension of the deity. In that sense, it is similar to that which God apprehends, which does not require an instrument, because God also doesn't have any physical manifestation of whatever it is that God thinks, whatever that even means. Right? There's no physical instruments associated with it. Although in reality, it is not like that. In actuality, don't think for a minute that God's thought, even using the word thought doesn't apply, is similar to our thought. But it appears to be so to the first stirrings of Binah. When you first think about it, there's a comparison. You can compare. It is because of this something, I mean, because of the divine intellect conjoined with man, that a human being has this divine intellect within him, that it is said that he is in the image of God and in his likeness, not that God, may he be exalted, is a body and possesses a shape. So here we have the Rambam explaining to us how to read the psukim, how to read. What does it mean? Naseh Adam b'Tzelmenu kidmusenu. I wish I had longer, because I wanted to go to chapter 2, because chapter 2, which we're going to do next week, is, I mean, today was beautiful too, but chapter 2, and I'm going to give you a little preview, talks about the sin of eating of the tree of knowledge, and how Maimonides understands that sin. And he what exactly did human beings get when they got the knowledge of good and evil? And it's the next chapter is stunning, and you'll never read Bereshis again the same way once you read Maimonides' explanation. But I'm saying that now to hopefully whet your appetite for next week. But I'm going to stop here and ask if anyone has questions or comments on today's.
I would ask a question. You use the term Tzelem, Demut, and Toar. Could you perhaps write out a lengthier definition so that we could really keep the distinctions between those terms in front of us when we're reading? Not if you can't, and if it's too much work, that's fine. I think I got it, but I just thought it would be easier to.
Yeah, we would have to write a pre-guide to the perplexed translation. Tzelem, I would translate as image, Demut as likeness, and Toar as form or shape, right? And then a post guide for the perplexed translation, which would be Tzelem, meaning the essence, Demut as a comparison of some sort. I had to think of a better word, and Toar as the same thing, as a form or a shape. But that would be how I would have to say it. But someone else that has a better handle on language than I do might be able to do a better job with it.
That's good.
And any other comments, questions?
I would say I'll pick up the point. I mean,
Okay.
Right from the opening quote of part 1.
Mm-hmm.
Open ye the gates.
Yes.
Would you give us another translation for that we could? I didn't get a chance to write it down, but I mean the one that is, in your opinion, the proper translation.
Okay. Well, Pitchu she'arim, open the gates. V'yavo goy tzadik, and may the righteous, and may a righteous nation enter. Shomer emunim, one who seeks the truth. The last one, seeks the truth, is some of the translations actually say that, or that keeps faithfulness, but I take seek the truth as the better one. I think the first JPS translation of the Torah, the original Jewish Publication Society one from the early 20th century, it seeks the truth like I did. I have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure they did.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a very prosaic question.
Yes.
We had a different link for tonight's class. Are we going to continue using that different link for future
Yes.
classes, or do we go back to the old link?
No, continue using the new one. And I don't know why, but when I'm in Zoom, it only lets me schedule 7 lectures in a row. So I did 7, and then there must be a better way to do this. I just don't know what it is, but I'll figure it out. And I wanted to I tried to do the same thing again for another 7, but it didn't let me, and it made a new link. So I don't know, I was doing something wrong. I had to say that's my technical lack of expertise, I guess. I'm sorry about that. But yes, the one that you use today will be the same one we use next week. And I apologize for the confusion in the beginning.
No problem. Thank you.
Next week, will we be doing chapter 2?
Yes, we're just going to continue straight. And we're gonna learn how Rambam understands the sin of the Eitz Hadat.
Okay.
It's gonna be fun, of the tree of knowledge.
Oh, you use the term. If nobody else has any questions, I'll just continue talking. You use the term intellect as what distinguishes humans from lower forms of animals.
Yes.
But intellect is a kind of a high-level term. Can you in philosophy, I would say, this is myself talking, that what distinguishes us from lower animals is that we're able to reason. And I'm not sure if intellect includes that, or intellect includes things like memory and other attributes too.
Based on the, I'm sorry, based on the language that Rambam uses, it's to him it seems like more comprehension and understanding, and which requires reason in order to understand.
So-
Yeah, go ahead.
Could I know that back in Rambam's time, it wasn't popular to think about these sorts of things. But let's take a human being who was born with a flawed intellect. Let's assume we're talking about a child born with Down syndrome, who has a less developed intellect than perhaps even some forms of non-human animals. But my guess is that Rambam would view that child born with Down syndrome, although obviously I didn't know what it was, to still be in the image of God, that there was something connecting him to God, some essence, even though that person really does not have a developed intellect. Now, am I just imposing my sort of modern values on Rambam?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, yes. To some extent, not. I mean, I think Rambam would have thought of human beings of lesser intellect as somehow less, still human, and still important to grant them the privileges that granted to human being. In other words, that we need to respect them, take care of, etc. But I think there will be places in this book that you'll get the feeling that a person of lower intellect is somehow less. So there are certain underlying things in I love to emphasize the parts of what Maimonides thought that speak to us today, but there are parts of Maimonides thought that will kind of grate on our modern sensibilities. And this is one of them. But we'll see as we go through it, and you'll come to a conclusion yourself. But that's my short answer. Any other comments? I do want to leave that with the Rambam's analysis of the pasuk in Shmuel about the forms of the hemorrhoids as something which took an extremely silly and sounding and difficult verse and made it into something with a very deep idea. Is really the value, is one of the major values of Rambam's approach. And I could have just read past it. And I was talking in the beginning of this to Steve about this, and right before the lecture started, that you could just read past it and say, oh, that's his proof of this. But if you go to Shmuel and look at it, and then you say, wow, if you read it the way Rambam is reading it, it really it takes this text and makes it make sense. And it's so true with so much of what we read as we go through this book. And I want you to pay attention to that using Rambam's method and his way of reading the Torah, so many things that you look at and are either questionable or difficult or seem to be almost meaningless, the questions all of a sudden, they shine, they light up, and they're no longer questions. And that's really the guide to the perplexed. So until now, when you learn Shmuel, right, those verses were kind of perplexing and weird sounding. All of a sudden now, he just deperplexed us. he made that verse into something that meant something. And I think you'll find that happen over and over and over again as we go through the book. So if there's no other questions, I'll call it a day, and we'll see everybody again same time next week. We good? All right. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you.